Which USFL player should the Baltimore Ravens consider signing? We talk about that and more next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we return here with another episode of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire. Of course, we're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. We're free and available on all platforms. And we're back as we continue to creep closer and closer to training camp. I know I'm getting excited for training camp. I know we still have a couple weeks to go before it all begins and the festivities arrive, but we're still, every day that we talk here, every day that we talk about the Ravens, we're getting one day closer to training camp. And here today, I do want to talk about a couple of different things. And I know we've been talking about roster construction for this team over the past couple of weeks. And I wanted to take that from a different angle here today and talk about the USFL, a league that just wrapped up their first season. Their championship happened. And now players can sign with the NFL. Some guys already have workouts lined up. And it's interesting because there are players on both offense and defense that the Ravens could definitely consider signing potentially. So we'll do the second segment. We'll talk about the offensive players. The third segment, we'll talk about the defensive players, stuff we obviously have done here before, doing offense in the second segment, defense in the third segment. But I still think that they could maybe make the 53-man. So we'll do that in the second and third segments. In the first segment, though, I do want to almost like continue our conversation about Lamar Jackson and his work ethic. And I know this is a conversation we had right around the voluntary workouts time, the OTAs, where he wasn't showing up and people were wondering, well, why isn't he doing this? Why isn't he doing this? And he posted a picture on social media yesterday of him looking jacked. I'll say that. He's very muscular. He's somebody who, again, hard worker. So I want to talk about that, what this hard work that he's working towards is going to do for him, the body transformation that we've seen from him, and just stuff along those lines. So we're going to talk about all that here today, though. First, if you're here with us on YouTube, thank you for subscribing. If you have subscribed already, if you haven't, you're wondering why you should. We put out Daily Ravens content 5 days per week. So whether you want opinions, news, analysis, whatever you want, we have it here, Ravens, for you Monday through Friday in video form. So you're seeing my face and my background and everything. So be sure to, again, like this video, subscribe to the channel. Our next goal here, 3,000 subs on YouTube. And then in audio form, same show, both audio and video. If you're just hearing my voice, thank you for tuning in there and listening wherever you're listening, whether you're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, the whole 9 yards. Thank you for doing that. Be sure to turn notifications on, and so follow us everywhere as well. And be sure to follow me on Twitter at Catcher34, the Locked On Ravens account at Locked On Ravens. So let's talk now about Lamar Jackson. And Jackson, again, somebody who we all know is such a hard worker, and it feels like some of that hard work doesn't get recognized by some people. It gets recognized by a lot of people. A lot of people understand the work he puts in, the work that he goes through. He's not somebody to necessarily broadcast every single thing he does, but he does put some stuff out there to show that he is working hard. And I know the whole voluntary OTA conversation was one that a lot of people got tired of it pretty quickly. I know I was in that conversation a little bit in terms of, okay, can we just move on? Can we not talk about this anymore? Because look, again, my stance was, should he have showed up? Do I think he should have showed up? Yeah, probably. But was it a big deal that he didn't? No. I'm not going to hold anything against anybody if anything is not mandatory. If it's not mandatory, they can make their own decision. So that's where I was. But people were saying, well, this is the be all end all. The Ravens aren't going to win the Super Bowl because of this. And I do. I think every rep is valuable. But at the same time, Lamar Jackson was getting in reps of his own with his own guys over the course of that period. So while it wasn't necessarily getting center snaps with Tyler Linderbaum or throwing to Rashad Bateman or whatnot, he was working out, and we're seeing that with the body transformation. If you remember, when Lamar Jackson came into the league in 2018, he was very slight of frame, a very I don't want to say skinny, but he didn't have the biggest frame in the world. And, from where he was then to where he is today, you can clearly see the transformation that he's had. And to a point, you almost expect that, right? A player coming into the NFL with the body frame that Lamar Jackson had. If you're wondering what I'm talking about, you can look up a picture of him in college at Louisville, or, his first couple seasons in the NFL. Where that was then to where his body is now is night and day. And I think there are a lot of things that will help him because of what he has done with his body, the ability to take hits and the ability to stand in the pocket a little bit more, the arm strength that we've seen from him. He's been working out all different aspects of his body. And again, we see it. We see the transformation. And James Urban during, or at least after one of the mandatory minicamp sessions, talked about the spirals, the tight spirals, the zip that he has on that football. And you can, again, you can see the difference. And I know the coaches get a different up close look at these guys. Obviously, they're right there next to him, and it's a little different for that. But you can also see, if you're just watching from afar, you're watching videos or whatnot, there is a bit of a difference. And Lamar Jackson and the Ravens did want to push the ball down the field in terms of intended air yards per attempt last season. Lamar Jackson ranked third in the NFL, only behind Russell Wilson and Justin Fields in that 9-yard range. So they wanted to push the ball down the field. Lamar Jackson has, I don't want to call it sneaky arm strength because he has good arm strength, but people, they don't understand that he does have the arm strength and he has a good touch on those deep passes. It's not just he's chucking it and nothing happens. I think what we saw, what that was Tyler Huntley. Huntley very much struggled on the deep ball part of his game, especially when Lamar Jackson ended up leaving with that injury. So to get that aspect back to the Ravens offense, it will go, it all ties into one thing where it's not just, oh, well, Lamar Jackson worked on his arm and it's only going to result in arm strength. No, it's different than that. I remember, was it last offseason? I can't even remember when it was. It was last offseason because it was Sammy Watkins. Last offseason, when the Ravens posted that video of Lamar Jackson throwing that, it was a bad spiral to Sammy Watkins. It wasn't even a spiral at that. And everybody got on Lamar Jackson about it. They got on the Ravens too for posting it in the first place, I remember. And I think they did take it down. But that play compared to what we saw this year with that, the throw that gets me, or that I keep coming back to from what the Ravens have put out there on social media this offseason, was the one to Mark Andrews where it's in slow motion. It's like a side angle or something. And the ball literally looks like it's on a rope. And I'm not saying that every pass Lamar Jackson threw last year was a bad spiral like that to Sammy Watkins. The spiral, people talk about the spiral a lot more than it should be talked about. Like Peyton Manning threw ducks all the time. And who is Peyton Manning? One of the best quarterbacks of all time. Do you want to have a great spiral on football? Sure. Do you have to have a great spiral on footballs? It doesn't have to be perfect every time. And no quarterback throws a perfect spiral 100% of their throws. But I think we have seen the spiral be a bit better from Lamar Jackson. And that, again, it contributes to the zip. It contributes to this. And it all comes back to the working out, being able to work out with his guys, work out during the offseason. And people talked about how, well, if he's not at OTAs, what's he doing? Well, he was working. He wasn't just lazing around doing nothing. I know I've talked about that before. But the fact that we've seen this body transformation from him, he is serious about his success. He is serious about getting better. And it's not, it's everything. It's watching film. It is the body transformation. It's being able to take the experiences that he has had, good and bad, at the NFL level and kind of stack those together, put them together, and it all combines into one thing. So that's why I'm personally so excited about Lamar Jackson in his 5th year, because I think he's motivated. He's someone who is very competitive. We all know he's competitive. He's said that himself. He has showed it on the field. He wants to win. He wants to win football games, and he wants to bring a Super Bowl championship to Baltimore. He has said all of those things before. And I think that with his will to win, the work that he has put in, and what we heard about him from mandatory minicamp, everybody was saying he was throwing the ball great and everything was going well. Obviously, you got to translate that over to training camp, the preseason, if he does play out. I don't think he will, but if he does, and then obviously the regular season games. But we saw it the first half, the beginning part of the 2021 season, the pass offense looked good. It looked better, at least. I'll say it looked better than what we saw in 2020, in 2019 even. So I think that when you're looking, well, maybe not 2019. 2019 was a historical year for him, but it's the evolution that should be keeping up with Lamar Jackson is the offense. And so I think that while it will be more of a run-heavy team this year than what we saw last year, the Lamar Jackson, I think, and I hope, will still be put in situations to throw the football effectively, because that is a huge part of his game. He has really just shaped his body into a player that I think is going to benefit him in multiple aspects of his game, not just one, not just two, but multiple. So, those pictures that he posts, the workout videos that he posts, some people do it differently. Some people post everything they do for workouts. Other people post nothing they do. Lamar Jackson is kind of in the middle, and you can get a sense of what he's working on, how he's transforming based off of what he's posting. It's not all there, but I do think it gives a little glimpse in the stuff that we've seen, the body transformation. Again, I keep coming back to it because I think it is a key part of his success in 2022. And I think he's continuing to hone himself into saying, hey, look, the back half of his season wasn't good, right? We all know that the back half was a far cry from what was expected of him. So now coming into this year, I think he's motivated and he'll do I'm excited for what he can bring. That's what I'll say for sure. But we still have a ton to talk about here. We're going to dive into the USFL, talking about some of the players that the Ravens could sign on the offensive side of the ball. So be sure to stay tuned. We still have a ton to talk about here on the show. But first, I do want to tell you a bit about Built Bar. And there are a ton of good things that Built Bar has been doing lately. And you've probably already tried the amazing coconut brownie chunk Built Bar, but your friends at Built have given the coconut brownie chunk the puffs treatment. And yeah, so that means the brownie chunk Built Bar puff flavor is now in a chewy marshmallow covered in 100% real chocolate. And it's like a fluffy coconut brownie goodness, but they are also good for you. They're low calorie, they're low sugar, they're high protein, and they are delicious as well. And you can also enjoy them guilt-free, because the best part is because they taste amazing, but again, you can also enjoy them because they are a healthy treat for you. They have that delicious coconut-rich sweet brownie flavor with creamy marshmallow, so stop fantasizing. Get to Built.com to order your box of coconut brownie chunk Built Puffs right now. Go to Built.com, use promo code LOCK15, get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at Built.com. We're back. Our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Ostreicher, your host, still here with you. And thank you so much again for making Locked On Ravens your first listen. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube. Like the video on YouTube. It does help out a ton. Be sure to also follow us in audio form and turn notifications on. But let's now talk about the USFL. Now, this was a league that, again, just finished up their first season. The Birmingham Stallions winning the first ever USFL championship. And now that the championship is actually over, players can sign from the USFL to the NFL. And there have actually already been some players that have scheduled workouts, that have had workouts already. The championship was on July 3rd. And there were some talented players. So I know when we're talking about certain signings for the Ravens, a lot of people think of, well, the NFL veterans, Julio Jones, Justin Houston, Jason Pierre-Paul, Will Fuller, guys we've talked about. And obviously we've identified the wide receiver position and the outside linebacker position. So, and maybe inside linebacker, maybe corner, a couple others as well. But I'm going to read through, and this will be offense, some of the best USFL players on the offensive side of the ball from this year and talk about their stats, what they could bring, and if the Ravens should consider signing them. This won't just be positions of need, though. I'll also look potentially at quarterbacks, potentially at running backs, maybe tight ends, and maybe if the Ravens want like a depth piece, could that be the guy if they're not satisfied with the depth they have? So some of the players on the offensive side of the ball that at least I am intrigued by, I would say, we'll start off with Victor Bolden, who is a wide receiver that actually I had my eye on him before he actually went to the USFL, and he was somebody who actually spent time with San Francisco, Buffalo, Detroit. So he's been in the NFL. He's a player at Oregon State that I watched his college tape. He is a returner, first of all, an amazing guy, but also the thing that he was able to bring, he did have some speed, and he ended up leading the Stallions who won the championship with 42 receptions. He had 193 yards after the catch, which was great. He also had amazing stats in terms of all-purpose yards with 1,209. He was selected to the All-USFL offensive team as a receiver. And he also, as I talked about his returning, had 645 kick return yards during the regular season. So this is a player that is very intriguing. Again, it does go back to the college days for me. But the thing that I kind of think about is, what do the Ravens need from a skill set perspective? Speedster is definitely one of them, but Bolden is on the smaller side. He's 5'9", 175 pounds, but he does have sticky hands. He does have the versatility to play in a lot of different spots, plus the returner aspect of this as well. Now, the Ravens do have Devin Duvernay, so it's not like they need a returner. It's not like they have to bring in somebody to be the returner. They have their guy. But if the Ravens wanted to, maybe they see somebody who did have the success at the USFL level, has been in NFL organizations before, had the success in college, maybe if the Ravens want to go with the smaller size receiver, Victor Bolden Jr. could be the guy for them. So he's a very intriguing prospect to me. at least from the wide receiver position. Another guy is Cavante Turpin from the Generals, who went to TCU, and he was a super explosive playmaker. He had 540 receiving yards, and that actually led the USFL, and he actually had a USFL high 316 yards after the catch, had 4 touchdowns. Also returning, he had a 71 punt return for a touchdown, and also he earned the MVP award in the USFL. So he was one of the best receivers, one of the best players in this league. And actually, I should say that the USFL only plays 10 game season, so you might be looking at his receiving total and you're thinking 540 yards. That led the whole league. Yeah, they only played in 10 games, and so it's not a 17 like the NFL does. So he's somebody who, again, another interesting player that I think could, if the Ravens want to go the USFL route, they want to bring in another wide receiver. There is still, I'd say there's still a chance the Ravens keep 6 wide receivers. I think it's going to be 5 personally. I've said I think it's going to be 4 running backs, 5 wide receivers, and 4 tight ends. But in the event that the Ravens do want to maybe just bring in more competition or add on 2 extra wide receivers alongside Rashad Bateman, Devin Duvernay, James Prochet, and Tylan Wallace, maybe they could add a guy like Victor Bolden or Cavante Turpin. But another receiver, we're continuing with the wide receivers. Another guy who I think could be more of a fit from a big body perspective is Jonathan Adams. And he actually, it was interesting for him in the NFL. He was with Detroit. He ended up getting cut before training camp, suspended for 6 games. He did have over 1,000 yards in his final season at Arkansas State, but he's 6'2", 210 pounds. And actually, in the 2021 draft, had a 4th to 5th round grade on him. So he was a player that was very highly regarded coming out of college. But if the Ravens do want to go the big-bodied route, if they want to add a player who could go up, make contested catches, and has that big-bodied frame, Adams could be somebody who I think could be a player for them that really makes an impact. And he played for the Breakers last year. He ended up having 30 receptions with 398 yards and 3 touchdowns through 9 games. So that's what his stat line was like. And if it's like if the Ravens add a receiver from the USFL and they want to go small, I'd probably say Victor Bolden. If they want to go big, Jonathan Adams is probably the guy. You also have Turpin, who could provide them with something else. But I think that those are the 3 wide receivers I would look at. And then maybe other positions. Darius Victor, who was a running back for the Generals last year, actually won the Offensive Player of the Year award in the USFL. He's a 5'8", 209-pound guy, so the body frame is similar. I know the comparisons have been Maurice Jones-Drew or Mark Ingram, but he had 577 rushing yards and 9 touchdowns, which were a league high there. He's strong, he's explosive, so maybe if the Ravens aren't satisfied with their depth, who knows? They could bring in a guy like that. Salcanella, who's a tight end who also played for the Breakers. He was from Auburn, and also he's a pass catcher. He ended up earning all USFL offensive honors. He had 34 receptions, 368 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He's 6'5", 230 pounds, so he's a big guy. He has a long wingspan, and he also can block in the run game. This would probably be a practice squad spot. Like, I definitely don't think the Ravens need another tight end. But if they want to add depth, like if Josh Oliver gets claimed or something, if they cut him or they trade him, maybe they could add a guy like Canella who could just be on the practice squad. And that could be somebody who they look at. Also, an interesting one, and I know that the Ravens don't need a starter, but the quarterback position, Chase Cook is from the Stars, from Northern Arizona. He was the most consistent performer at quarterback in the USFL this season and ended up finishing with 1,334 passing yards, 12 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions in only 7 starts. He actually replaced an injured player, so he ended up starting from there on out. He's 6'4", 205, and also makes pretty good decisions overall, can control the game from inside the pocket. The thing that I might say, well, why would they sign him if I'm looking at this, is he doesn't have the athleticism that a Jackson has, a Tyler Huntley has. The Ravens, I think, definitely want to add players who can run their offense, and they don't have to necessarily go from the Joe Flacco to Lamar Jackson situation they had a couple years, well, more than a couple years ago now. But, Joe Flacco and Lamar Jackson from an athleticism perspective, no disrespect to Joe Cool. That's an elite quarterback right there. He's just not as athletic, I'll say, as a Lamar Jackson. So I think Cook is somebody who could be, again, like if the Ravens don't like what they see out of Brett Hundley, or they don't see Anthony Brown as their guy on the practice squad, maybe they could bring in a guy like Cookus who did impress in the USFL. But other than that, I think that the most likely position I see the Ravens adding from the USFL on offense is at wide receiver, and there are quality options there. I think that when you look at what the Ravens have right now. You have your 4 locked in. And is there going to be a guy in the UDFA pool that steps up? Is it Shamar Bridges? Is it Mekhi Polk? Devan Williams? They have options, but if they want to bring in more competition, maybe they look to the USFL and they say, well, we want the speedster small Victor Bolden, or, we want the big body Jonathan Adams, or even a Turpin who was the MVP of the league. So they have options, and I think we're going to see some guys sign from the USFL. I'm not just talking about this just because just to talk about it. I think there will be players from this league who do sign to the NFL. Will they make 53-man rosters? I don't know. But I think that it is an intriguing conversation to have, which is why I'm having it here today and why I'm talking about it today. So there are options at the offensive or on the offensive side of the ball for Baltimore, but we're also going to be talking about defense. When we get back, we're going to be talking about the defensive side of the ball. There are some other options there at positions of need for the Ravens who they could bring in. So be sure to stay tuned for that. Still a ton to talk about here on Locked On Ravens. We're back. Our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still here with you. And again, thank you so much for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. Again, we're free and available on our all platforms. And be sure to make your second listen of the day Locked On NFL, where I hosted the Monday show. So if you want to hear me talk to experts around our network, be sure to tune into that. Be sure to subscribe to our channel here on YouTube and like the video, and be sure to turn notifications on in audio form. Follow us there as well. But let's talk about the defensive side of the ball. And the first guy I want to talk about is Chris Odom, who does have NFL experience, played with Washington for a couple of years. But I do think that for Odom, this is a guy who was the defensive player of the year in the USFL, had upwards of 12 sacks last season. I mean, this is incredible for a player like Chris Odom to be able to do that in 10 games. First of all, again, it's a 10-game season, right? So it's not like he's playing 17 games and having the 12 sacks or whatever. No, he played a 10-game season, just like the whole USFL, and had 12 and a half sacks. So he actually already has 3 workouts, and it makes sense. He was a dominant player from the edge, from the outside linebacker position. Baltimore, does need some outside linebacker help at this point, and I've been saying that for months and months and months. So if you do bring back Justin Houston, but you feel like you need one more person there, I think that a guy like Chris Odom could definitely be somebody to keep an eye on. I also think Demarcus Gates is somebody. He had 6 sacks, had an interception as well. The Ravens, like their sack numbers they've been pretty inconsistent over the course of the last couple of seasons. Like I know they'll have like 10 sacks one game, and then they'll have like 3 for the next 3 weeks. Like it's very, very inconsistent. So I think for what the Ravens are and what they're looking for, if you want to add a player from the USFL to the Ravens on the defensive side of the ball, my first choice would be outside linebacker, because you have guys like Chris Odom and Demarcus Gates who can come in and make an impact, or if not in a big role, they can at least potentially play special teams, and they can play that aspect, which we know Baltimore values very, very much so. So I know sacks don't tell the whole story, but Chris Odom was extremely dominant at that level. And look, is the USFL the NFL? No, it's not. But I still think that sack number in that sample size of games is still very impressive. And Demarcus Gates with his 6, that's nothing to scoff at either in a 10-game season. So those two. And also I should mention that the Stallions, they had 3 former Ravens on their roster. They had Willie Henry, a former 4th-round pick out of Michigan, Aaron Adoye, who was an outside linebacker, and then they also had Michael Darius, who had some stops with the team as a wide receiver. So congrats to those guys. I mean, still winning the championship their first year, that's a pretty big deal. So congrats to them. But also the interesting part about this is the cornerback position. And Channing Stribling is somebody from the Stars who I think could be really, really intriguing. He is a ball hawk player and actually led the league in interceptions with 7. Now, cornerback is interesting, and it is. I've talked about how much I love the depth of the Ravens, but corner is an interesting one, and I did talk a bit about this yesterday, how the Ravens, it's Marlon Humphrey, Marcus Peters, Kyle Fuller, right? Those are your top 3. You're banking on a bounce back year from Kyle Fuller, who admittedly did struggle in Denver. He did struggle. So hopefully you get a bounce back there. Hopefully Marcus Peters returns from his injury and is good, whether it is week 1, 100%, whether it is, if they need to give him some more time. Marlon Humphrey having a bounce back season, which I fully expect. But then behind them, it's Jalen Armour-Davis, it's Pepe Williams. You have Brandon Stevens and Armour-Davis Washington, depending on if you classify them as a corner or safety. I know I talk about that all the time. But maybe if the Ravens feel like they want to have someone waiting in the wings, maybe on the practice squad or to see what he looks like in the preseason, I think Channing Stribling could be somebody who makes an impact. And before he's bounced around, he's played for the AAF, the Canadian Football League, the XFL, and obviously the USFL here. He ran a 4.640, so he's not like this super speed elite athlete or anything, but he is always around the ball. He has ball skills, he has instincts. And I think that any corner who has all that and who has had a good year at the USFL level here, like Stribling did, maybe some consideration. Does it result in a signing? I don't know. But I think that I would at least consider it if I'm the Ravens, if I'm still looking for depth. And it is a very tricky situation because the Ravens roster pretty much seems like it's all but set, maybe outside of a couple of additions here or there. But would those additions be USFL players? I would think maybe they'd be more on the NFL veteran side, like a Houston potentially. But if Eric DaCosta looks at some of these guys and sees value, I could certainly see them looking at somebody to bring in and maybe just give a chance to. All it takes is a chance. And if Stribling or somebody like that gets a chance to perform, and the Ravens, every year it seems like, or at least recently, the Ravens start out with 50 million corners and they end the year with 2 corners. Like it's almost like clockwork at this point. You don't want to see it happen again this season. That the Ravens cornerback depth has been extremely tested. Now, I think they are much more set up this year to deal with it than they were for the last couple of seasons. But I still think that, maybe just to have a guy like Stribling in the back pocket, that could be an intriguing option. Also, speaking of the edge outside linebacker position, Daven Bellamy is a player from the Breakers who also could make an impact. And he's been all around the NFL. He's put in 2 stints with Houston. He's had time with Cincinnati, Tennessee, San Francisco, the Chargers. He's 6'5", 259 pounds. He won the Defensive Player of the Week award in week 1. And he's 27 years old. So he's kind of like, I guess you could call it in his prime at this point. I don't know how good he can be at the NFL level, considering he has been there so many times and, hasn't quite made it yet. But sometimes it again takes that one chance. And when I look at needs for the Ravens, I have said it a million times, wide receiver and edge / outside linebacker are the 2 I look at and say, yeah, the Ravens could certainly stand to add a player there. And with these players in the USFL who are now lining up workouts, can potentially sign, maybe see what they got, the Ravens could certainly look to add some of those players. Like, they don't need a tight end. They don't need any more offensive linemen, I would say. Like right now, if injuries happen, this is another aspect of this. If injuries happen and these USFL players haven't signed anywhere, then the Ravens can maybe go back. And, this episode maybe has relevance then when you talk about we're in October or November or something, and all of a sudden the Ravens have no corners, or all of a sudden the Ravens have a couple offensive linemen who are out for a couple of weeks and they need somebody, or the tight end position is looking thin and they want to bring in somebody for the practice squad, or they have to call somebody up and they need somebody quickly. These USFL players could be ready for that situation. And so I think that there are the aspect of it I think about is how much these guys have worked for it. And obviously they have to earn it. This isn't just, they had a great year at the USFL level. They automatically earn and deserve a spot. Like, they have to continue working towards that goal. And it wouldn't just be all right, this guy had X amount of sacks or X amount of touchdowns at the USFL level. Let's bring him in, give him a 53-man roster spot. That's awesome. Because again, the NFL is a much different beast than the USFL or some of these other leagues as well. But we have seen success stories. We have seen those success stories from the CFL, for example, right? Like, there have been multiple players. Cameron Wake, a CSFL success story, who played for many years with the Miami Dolphins. That's a player who, the NFL wasn't in his early 20 futures, anything like that, but he ended up going to the CFL, performing well, but he ended up making the NFL and really had major impacts as an outside linebacker, defensive end type player for that Miami Dolphins team. So I believe that some of these guys will be able to work their way onto 53-man rosters, whether it is right out of the gate, whether it does take a little bit of time. But again, from looking at where the Ravens could add or where they could potentially need to sign somebody in the middle of the season, they do have options, whether it is on their own practice squad, if they have to call somebody up from the practice squad, to somebody from the USFL replace one of those guys on the practice squad. Injuries happen. It's the NFL. It's football. The Ravens will not go through an entire season 100% healthy. No team will. No team ever has. So I think when you're looking at just other outside the box options and aren't just like, this guy's a 10-year NFL veteran, or this guy has played in the NFL for X amount of years and hasn't done anything else, maybe the USFL is another avenue to bring in talent to maybe make an impact, only if you need it for a game or two, and only if it's needed on special teams for 5 snaps, let's say. But the Ravens were trotting out guys last year like Daryl Worley, who just didn't have it, other guys who just didn't have it. So maybe you just give other guys a chance to see what they can do if there is a position that clearly they would need more help at, whether it is performance-related, injury-related, etc. That's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. When we get back here tomorrow, I'll be rounding out the week here with more Ravens talk, so be sure to stay tuned for that, and I will see you right back here tomorrow.